Anyway, welcome to the Mike and Mario show. Excited to be back. Looking forward to connecting. Lots of things unfolding. More importantly, Mario, just the narrative of default globally is starting to pick up, and it should be of concern because currencies are the underpinning of all this debt out here. And so, before we dive into all that, how are you doing on your side of the woods, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Yes, we missed last week, but everything's fine. The weather here is still pretty cold, actually. But the other thing that's going on here is a lot of the stuff that happened during lockdowns and during the COVID pandemic. A lot of the actions of governments are coming out in a pretty explosive leak by the Daily Telegraph called the Lockdown Files. And it's weird that why it's coming out now, and I think it's going to make a lot of people angry, and it's going to I don't know. It seems to all the conspiracy theorists like us, so to speak, are all
Yeah.
been proven right. So
Right.
we'll have to see. So there's a lot going on socially as well. Like I said, economically, it doesn't look like inflation wants to come down or prices want to come down.
Right.
And yes, the central banks are really in a corner.
Right. And to talk about that, just really being able to distinguish between, the consumer price increases, continue to trend upward. And then, as you always like to mention, separating from the word inflation, which has been altered throughout history. But the money supply is they're still pumping currency. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And prices are still going up. So overall narrative of things are calming down is not present. But I think one of the most interesting concerns that will definitely get more attention in the next couple of weeks is going to be the probability. Now, in prior experiences, they always manage to pull things off the last minute, but it just seems at this current moment that the probability of a U.S. debt hiccup, because of the divide of our country right now, it just seems very timely that something could go wrong, therefore, leading to a trigger event. But the article here says the probability of a catastrophic U.S. debt default has been more than tripled since the start of this year. And that has a lot to do with the credit default swaps, or i.e. insurance against the debt, surging through the roof right now at the start of this year. But, do you see this unraveling smoothly, or could this be the catalyst, as you mentioned beforehand, to take us somewhere we don't want to go?
Most people expect when a push comes to shove that they will agree on something, that they will raise the debt ceiling. But I guess in the meantime, and up until they decide, it could get very turbulent, and it could affect confidence in the U.S. system. And we know already that a lot of the non-NATO Western countries are trying to diversify away from the dollar, de-dollarization, and the BRICS buying a lot of gold. And now we're seeing that the U.S. wants to punish countries like United Arab Emirates, Dubai, for dealing with the Russians. They want to punish Turkey as well for dealing with the Russians, because the United States thinks that sanctions that they put on third countries should apply to other countries, which is, it's like me having a country, Monaco 64 country, putting sanctions on Michigan, and then having a go at other other countries that deal with Michigan. I think that's gonna that impasse, or this debt ceiling thing, could make foreigners think even more harder than about being dependent on the dollar. And of course, that's not going to happen overnight, because the dollar is still very important, but it's just going to accelerate it. Yeah. But who knows? We were speaking before we came on air that maybe this time it will be different, and they'll pull the plug, and it will be a very good excuse for, and I'll let you fill in the blank there.
Yeah. No, and so just regardless of the fact, just the narrative itself and the timing of it plays hand in hand with the concept of, more economic turbulence. And of course, stock markets are not going to be too happy with this. Of course, the bond market is going to respond to this as this draws on. So no matter what, it's going to be more pressure on them to try to figure out how to unwind this. Or it's my suspicion that prior to events like this, where we always anticipated something coming through at the last minute, it just seems very likely that between now and the end of this year, where the whole idea of the Fed needing to so-called wanting to, or needing to pivot, but them not really pivoting and things like that, and just so much chaos coming to where I wouldn't surprise me one bit if there was a late payment on something to where that led to the fuse that lit, or the spark that lit the fuse, it just trickled across the globe to where, yeah, we really see some fireworks that we could have never have imagined before. So, and then that's perfect groundwork for, CBDC, the perfect CBDC narrative. So, I think
I just wanted to say one way they could unblock the debt ceiling would be taking back all the billions they gave to Ukraine, and that would be one positive of the U.S. debt default, that the military, security, pharmaceutical, industrial complex would unravel, and that would be great, actually.
Yeah, but the probability of that happening is not existed, because Biden made it clear that we're going to ride with Ukraine all the way to the end. And unfortunately, I have
the end could be when the United States defaults.
Correct, which is ultimately
yeah. I have to say, inflation is a kind of default. People talk about defaults, but
slow and gradual.
Hmm.
But yet, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But don't expect prior events to unfold the way that they have in this upcoming, spring, summer cycle. That's just my biggest thing. I just have a feeling that they would love to have more chaos out here. So just, something we're paying attention to. But they're not the only ones experiencing concerns of default. So here we have another one. Let me share this with you. Let me grab it up here, put it on the screen real quick. So we got Blackstone. So a lot of people are now talking about this, and this could be the commercial real estate bubble bursting in a sense, but we'll see. But Blackstone defaults on 562 million Nordic property-backed CMBS, commercial mortgage-backed securities. So could this be the commercial real estate trickling into the real estate bubble bursting, or will this be plugged up somewhere along the line, or still 562 is still too small in the bigger scheme of things? What are you thinking?
Well, Blackstone, they stopped withdrawals back in December because of commercial real estate. I think it was a different property fund.
Yeah.
So and it was to do with real estate. All these private equity groups, Blackstone, BlackRock, and others, they're finding it more and more difficult to get liquidity because if investors want to sell out from these funds, it's very difficult to sell real estate or commercial property. So, yeah, it's starting to show cracks. And I have spoken about that in December and back in January, actually, when I was in Switzerland. I spoke about Blackstone and also BlackRock. BlackRock has stopped frozen withdrawals as well. So yeah, it could be. There's other things as well. Like I spoke about this week. Let me try to think. Oh yeah, auto, like the biggest, one of the biggest subprime auto loan, American Car Center. They've gone out of business. So it's all, and with interest rates and bond yields still rising, I think things are going to get worse.
Yeah, and one of the ripple effects of this type of activity here is that if you have Blackstone, basically withholding withdrawals from the 71 billion REIT, it will only create more concerns for the much more smaller companies, because just the REIT market in of itself, there's been more people trying to get cash in hand due to economic distress, unemployment concerns, all those type of issues, to where if you have everybody running to the exit at the last minute, then that's going to definitely cause a seize up of the real estate, or these investment tools that they've created into the real estate game. So this default could lead to more events down the line, because this is a pretty big player in the game. So it's just more evidence that as things unwind around us, all the promises to pay, present and future, they become a little hard to maintain those narratives. So, but yeah, we'll see how this plays out. But just one or two of more defaults on the horizon. And here's something else from the emerging market arena. It says markets brace for Pakistan's default risk. Got 7 billion debt looms. So I think 7 in USD, and then 2 billion of this is to China. And so smaller country, less significant country, but they're not the only ones in this total, debt binging economy that they've created. So what's the likelihood of, you think, of like a Pakistan or any other African nations that are heavily indebted? Of course, we got the IMF screaming that, we need to somehow rebalance or redo this debt. Is this stuff right here going to be a concern sometime this year that could lead to some more dominoes falling?
Yeah, every country or like a corporation or even individuals that have a lot of that. I think the easy credit period is gone that we've had. The central banks are going to have a really hard time justifying cutting rates and doing QE, even though we're seeing the Bank of Japan and the People's Bank of China increasing their balance sheets again. But all that will do is going to put a rocket up of real assets, and it's going to make sure that fiat currencies go from having lost like 98 to 99% of their value versus gold in the last 7 years. It's going to be the last 1%. And that last 1% doesn't seem like much, but it will be a wild ride. And it's all to do with interest rates. And the central banks can do all the QE they want, but it's going to be very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. And I mean, you just showed me all you showed me like the minefield and all the possible booby traps there, and Pakistan is just one of them. Blackstone, BlackRock, and subprime auto loans, UK defined benefit gilt funds, and all the rest.
And to one of the interesting things is I think I read articles a week ago or a couple weeks ago about how credit card companies have already written off buku loads of bad debt just because it's ultimately on their balance sheet in a sense to where it came out of nowhere and they can easily discharge it with no repercussions anyway. So a lot of debt has already been wiped off where it can be, and so we got this type of debt here that is not as easy to remove from the system. But here's an article headline that I saw that really puts a bigger picture as to how large this is. And this is from a couple years ago, but it just talks about understanding the 15 trillion market for emerging market bonds. And so this is, I think, literally a couple years ago. So it was 15 trillion then, and I'm sure it increased since then, but that's all the type of debt that we're referring to here that it needs to be paid back, and borrowing costs has gone up, and serviceability of these debts are no longer as easy as it was. So it's going to be a lot of defaults in the pipeline. That's for sure. All right, let's keep it going. So let's talk a little bit about the easy currency that's coming. You kind of hinted at a little bit, but this article caught my attention because we see a lot of optimism in the stock market with people talking about another rally and all this stuff. I see a lot of green candles in the crypto and in the stocks market, in general. But it says here, the secret of stocks success of 2023, an unexpected 1 trillion liquidity boost by central banks. And a good portion of this, the article talks about is the PBOC. And of course, you mentioned Japan and whatnot. So is this like a way where, because the Federal Reserve, being the leading bank, have already dialed back and they're deliberately trying to, withdraw, and the world relies upon the dollar, other banks coming in to kind of prop up things, and it not garnish much attention just because it's not the primary central bank in the Fed. So do you think that's been a way that they've been able to hide some things and get some things done when it comes to this graph here?
Definitely, if you look at the BOJ, I think they've done since December, because they've had to defend this yield curve control. They've increased their balance sheet by, I think, 300, at least $150 billion, and you can see that the People's Bank of China balance sheet has gone back up. It's only the Fed and the ECB that's still going lower, but the ECB as well. I looked at like a chart, and it talked about different parts of the ECB's balance sheet. The parts where they buy bonds, that amount of bonds hasn't gone down. They haven't been doing quantitative tightening. What they've done is they've decreased funding to banks. So the ECB is still highly liquid. The other thing I would say, the reason why stocks and a lot of people are still borrowing, consumer credit is still at record highs, is because interest rates are still too low. So what that means, the real debasement of the currency is more in the double digits, and interest rate is about 4.5%. So you're getting paid to borrow. I mean, if you can borrow relatively low, because if you can borrow at 6% and the currencies or the real inflation is more like 10 or 12 or even 15, like Shadow Stats talks about, then you're actually, and that's why things are still quite bubbly. I would say maybe that's why the stock market has kept going up. But I think a lot of the yen that the Bank of Japan has created in the last 3 months, that flows into the dollar and into treasuries, because interest rates in Japan are being kept artificially low. So Japanese investors go and buy treasuries, maybe a bit, or other stuff. So in the free capital flow world, it's not just the Fed.
Yeah. That's interesting, man. That is very interesting there. So I call it sly quantitative easing still happening, just not from your typical players that led it prior to, like that was primary drivers over the last decade or so, was the ECB, UK, and the US, and all those other ones were also doing it, but now it's the other banks doing it. So,
well, the governor of the Bank of England yesterday, because we still have double-digit CPI at 10%, and the other measure we have, RPI, is at almost 14, and our rates are only at 4. But yesterday he came out and said, we're probably almost finished now raising rates, which is crazy. He just thinks that prices and everything is just going to come down because he wishes. But one of the reasons why I think he said that, and I spoke about this in my video today, is that we had the biggest 1 month drop in house prices, average house prices in the UK in 10 years. So they're concerned about housing killing over here.
I think that's global. I know Canada's already having some issues with that. And I just saw an article saying that U.S. Borrowing rates for mortgages is almost going back towards 7. So that definitely, is going to slow things down globally. So no surprises here. But it's just, man, it's hard to really read through all this because it doesn't make sense. But the fact they're all in sync with this narrative of we're going to continue to hike or we're going to continue to assess things because it's still running hot. Like it'll take, like you mentioned this before, like the amount of time needed to really bring things down with the current level of rates they have now would take damn a decade or something like that. So chance of that happening is not too promising, to say the least. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the other issues in the UK. I even talked about it earlier about the food rationing. And so, like, have you seen that, like really in your neighborhood type of thing, or is this just one or two places?
No, it's happening. My wife went shopping, I think, last week, and there weren't any eggs at. I think she went to Aldi. I don't know if you have that supermarket in the US.
Yeah, you do.
And a lot of the vegetables are not there. And this article is saying that this is being done by design, and it has a point. But the other thing I think this shows is that it's a currency crisis, really. And we know when there are currency crises that producers don't want that currency anymore. And, the pound, I would say after the '08 crisis, it dropped quite sharply from 2 to the dollar to like 140, but then it rebounded and stayed between 150, 170 for quite a few years. And last year, we went almost down to 1. So it disrupts everything. A currency that is falling like that so sharply disrupts, people don't want to pay it. I think there's a lot of it involved. A lot of people are blaming Brexit, but I think it's just that the world's been focused on technology, bonds, QE, and they've neglected the real economy, and that's what's happening in the UK. But I think probably happening in the US. I see that your eggs are very expensive,
Yeah.
and
And
I wouldn't be
yeah.
surprised if it happens in the continent here in Europe either.
Yeah, I haven't seen it directly, but yet I've seen different commentators talk about in certain pockets throughout the country, grocery stores are putting up signs saying, trying to limit or ration off a certain amount of things. So yeah, it's inevitable, man. But what our biggest concern here was the the train derailments of all those trains that have toxic waste on them in a point to where the Ohio situation is still big, talking about food contamination because it's in the ground in the water system, and for whatever reason they're exporting the contaminated water and stuff throughout the country. So it's like I don't understand that they got to dispose of it. But so anyway, it goes. Just it doesn't make sense. But it all to me points back to being something deliberate to destabilize the food. And I hear that they've already injected, with the mRNA technology, a lot of the cattle here, as well as wild animals too. So it's like like literally trying to cut out the food supply 100% so that people can eat the bugs the way that they
Now,
want
there's a
people to do.
good question here from over here. Eminem, do you think by the end of the year we'll be wearing masks again and social distancing? Dr. Fauci 2.0. Well, first of all, I try to avoid wearing a mask as much as possible. Uh, and this is a good question because we could talk about what's happening here. The Daily Telegraph, they've leaked a lot of WhatsApp messages between government ministers and bureaucrats during lockdown. And I don't think we're going to have masks here in this country. Maybe I can bring it up here. I'll share this.
I got the
Um,
lockdown files
yeah, you've
on.
got it, the lockdown files. Yeah. So this has come out a couple of days ago, and it's really explosive. It's just showing how they have contempt for the public. He's caring about how he looks great on the media. And one of the guys, he's the Simon Case. He's the private secretary, or I think he's the cabinet secretary. He's the head of the civil service. This is what he said to Matt Hancock. Matt Hancock, he's the health minister during the lockdowns during COVID. He said 149 chose to enter the country and are now in quarantine hotels due to their own free will. And this guy said, "Oh, hilarious!" So they forced people who were outside the country who were coming back during this scamdemic. I'm sorry to say that. Hopefully, it'll be okay.
Right.
And and they said, "Oh, it's hilarious that they chose to stay in a hotel." But they forced them to stay in that
Right.
hotel.
They lied to them. Like, all governments in lock and step lied to the public, telling them that it's best that they stay 6 feet apart. And I think it was 15 days to stop the spread over here. Was it 15 days over there as well? That was the global narrative, 15 days to stop the spread.
2 weeks to flatten the curve.
3 years. Yeah. Oh yeah. And we're talking about how with the before we went online, talking about Chile and the HN51, which is something that they're really pushing and getting the WHO involved with the pandemic treaty that Chile signed up to. So that could be another thing they're going to try to roll out sooner than later. So you never know, but we always anticipate some type of crises or event occurring just because they're going to try to destabilize society as fast as they can. So there's always going to be something coming their way. So our way, rather. So as far as us being locked down again, people in America ain't going to stand for that. It'll take something. It'll take something a lot more obvious, as far as, and I mentioned this the other day on one of my little rants about, people question the narrative of wearing masks because a lot of people didn't even get impacted by it. Some people did pass away, unfortunately. But if another event comes, it will be something where it's going to be obvious, where people like their skin going to be peeling or something where you can't question it at all. That's how bad something will be if they're that bold. But I think we'll have some type of war before we full-fledged war before we have something like that. So
Yeah,
All right, let's get to some questions then. What we got here? So let's get to some questions. Feel free to throw out some ideas, thoughts, suggestions in the chat about anything. And also saw somebody mention about metals and silver getting a little bit of a bid. Let me find my button here. But let me see. Monitor, if you see any questions, feel free to jump
Oh
on
yeah,
them.
persistence over resistance. He's got a question. How can you have inflation on a CBDC if the protocols
Where's that at?
are
Yes,
524 or I guess 1224 your time?
1224. The government
Persistence.
can.
That's persistence. Yeah, that one. How can you have inflation on the CBDC if the protocols of the network do not allow additional supply to be created?
Government can make mandates.
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was interviewing Clive Thompson, and what he said is you could usher in a CBDC and make the current dollars like you can't use them. You have to use the CBDC. So you kind of wipe out the government debt in terms of the currency that we use, because the government debt would be in the old dollar. So
Yeah.
what he meant by inflating it means like the CBDC just starts out a small amount, and then they can keep inflating it again to kickstart things again. That's what he meant. So you can inflate a CBDC. It's just that the CBDC would be used because they're talking about having limits, how many dollars or pounds you can have in your wallet. So if they come out and say everyone has to have a digital central bank wallet, and your old dollars you can only spend, let's say, you can only spend a tenth of it every year, so basically they can write off the old dollars and bring in the CBDCs, and then they can grow the system again, because these people love inflation. That's what makes them tick, because inflation means more currency for them, more, and they're going to get it, not us, of course. The government will get it. That's what he meant. So you can't inflate a CBDC unless you back something real. I don't know what you think, Mike.
That's going to be the tricky experience, man. Just because cash, even though it's abundant, Federal Reserve notes are abundant on this planet, and so how will they? They can't. It's just because people will still use cash, especially if things get bad. They're going to use cash. You talk about in the long run?
No, they will. You won't be able to use cash because people they won't be accepted anymore. There'll be that's what it's all about. Especially if the U.S. government defaults, that cash is going to be worthless.
Yeah, I do agree with that for those who are awake and aware, but it's going to take some time for people to realize that the cash that they possess, what is the initial problem? Because people will still use it, because whoever got a little something left over, you're still going to try to extend it to somebody in form of legal tender, say, hey, give me this. Then that person on the end say, hey, I'm not taking that.
There's very little cash, actually physical cash, and very few people, not many people have physical cash. They've got it in their bank accounts. So if you tell them you can't use that anymore and you have to use the digital wallet and the digital currency, central bank digital currency, they could inflate it again.
Yeah, and so that would be the bulk of people's quote unquote savings. Like, in their savings account, sure, in their checking account, people probably have lesser amounts to where they'll have access to some form of cash, and even though it'd be smaller denominations, but it's going to be a long process regardless of how it plays out. So it's going to be. They made it clear that it's coming.
Well, hopefully it doesn't work and people don't accept it.
Correct. And I was thinking about prior to this era of life, how we always had alternatives, whether it was actual gold and silver coinage itself, the redeemable notes, and then we had the treasury notes, and on top of that, now we have the technology to use quote unquote cryptos. So hopefully we'll have options to where we won't be forced solely to use that CBDC. That's the biggest hope. But barter will still definitely be something people to use. What else we got here? Carlos says Mexico nationalized their lithium mines a couple weeks ago. ASAP move Tesla move into Mexico next week. Next, it could be for gold, silver mines. Game over for paper. Nationalizing. I saw that about Mexico deciding to bring home or to keep in-house their lithium, allow their country to secure enough lithium just because it's this race to go electric vehicle crap. So I guess their concern is that also becoming prevalent in the gold and silver mining space, which I do think at some point in the future that will be the case, because what better way for the government to try to reliquefy themselves other than trying to utilize their own resources in their own country for themselves, not for people.
I would also say that they doesn't mean that they would buy all the shares in the mines. They could buy a percentage, so it might not affect shareholders. I'm not saying it's right, but it's something that's possible with gold and silver. But I'm not really. I guess the thing to do is to diversify different companies.
Think about also being compensated, or the value of those share prices increasing in the currency that they are deliberately creating large amounts of. So it looks as if like your shares of that company is increasing in nominal value, but then again, the currency is. So yeah, diversification will be ultimately be the key. What else we got here? Jeff Yu says, how many paper silver ounces do you really think are out there versus the silver eagle in my pocket?
100 times at least. There's a lot of paper. There's a lot of promises for silver, and I think if the people who hold those promises, if they try to make good, try to get the silver from those promises, there wouldn't be enough. Well, there would maybe be enough, but the price would have to rise a lot more than $21 where we are around now. So I think COMEX is highly leveraged 200 times. I'm not sure. So yeah, there's a lot of paper there.
I wanted to talk about the CBDC. I just saw, I think just recently, a certain state here in the U.S. passed a bill to make it illegal to ban cash in exchange for CBDCs. And so I thought that was interesting, even though it's kind of early still, but good effort by the state to put it out there that businesses must accept cash regardless. Now we'll see how that plays out, because the cash still has Federal Reserve notes on it. If the Federal Reserve brings all that cash back in, then what cash do they have to use? So yeah, what else we got here? The government force all businesses to accept only CBDC to keep their license to do business and collect taxes. Local trade can possibly can get around. Yeah, definitely.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
All those proof of sale little card swipey thingies, and of course the digital ID tap and pay crap will definitely be CBDC oriented. So, Anarchy Tattoo Studio says, I remember hearing Lynette Zhang say that there are 64,000 paper contracts per ounce of physical, if my memory serves me correct.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
No, because there's 5,000 ounces in each contract. I think that's a bit too much, 64,000. Maybe she meant 64 ounces per every ounce. Because if each silver futures contract is 1,000 ounces. No, it's 5,000 ounces. So you'd have to multiply 64,000 by 5,000. I think that's a bit. I know there's a lot of paper, but not as much.
Yeah, here's another one says, will we get bank defaults? Is the fear to create runs, get people to withdraw lots of cash, and then switch to CBDC and make cash worthless?
That's definitely a possibility. I mean, I hold some cash, but what they would do, and I spoke of Clive, who I interviewed yesterday. He said what they've done in the past, because this happens in many countries. Like if there's a reset in Argentina or Brazil, if you have like $1,000 cash at home, and you want the new currency. They'll say you can bring the 1,000, but you're only going to get 100 of the new one. They never give it to you 1-to-1, because they're trying to shrink the money supply. to start again, to inflate again. So that's what we meant.
And I think the best example of that is what's happening in Nigeria right now with their so-called shortage of cash. They wanted to withdraw the old notes, bring out new notes, but now there's not enough new notes, so now there's pandemonium. And they're saying the best way around it, just use the e-naira, use the CBDC. That'll save you the headache. You won't need to come to the bank. So yeah, it's already happening. Maybe what else we got here? Hypothetical. Here's a hypothetical question. If a CBDC prevents a government from stealing tax funds and laundering money out of the country, and we have physical silver as currency, what then?
Would that
Would that? Oh, yeah.
Would that
Would
make
that
a CBDC more attractive? No, but the thing is, the government is running the CBDCs. They wouldn't do all the. They're using it as an instrument to rip you off even more. So yeah, central banks are not there to be nice to us. So yeah, I'm sorry that would never happen.
Yeah. Carlos says 62,000 per ounce, 62K. Let's fact check. Please invite Lynette Zhang on. That would be a bad idea. Adrian says, do you think countries will nationalize private vaults where precious metals are held? The Cayman, etc. Anything is possible. Certain jurisdictions will respond differently, especially if it's led by the West. Like I think like Singapore and countries like that are probably more in sync with the Eastern Bloc or that global South agenda. They may not be so keen to jump on that narrative. It's just the West who has the most to lose right now. They may try to cause vault issues on this region. So that's just my thought. But what are you thinking?
Well, Cayman Islands, I don't think they'd do that because I'm not even sure they have that many vaults there. They just have shell companies addresses. Yeah, and I think if they did that, if they do have vaults there, it would defeat the purpose. It would collapse their economy. But anything's possible. The U.S. and the U.K. could force the Cayman Islands. They could invade, bring democracy to Cayman Islands and something like that.
Yeah, all of a sudden a new election process. Says many states in Africa are on board with the BRICS. We're hearing, 100%.
Yeah,
that global South agenda, Eurasian bloc is growing day by day, and so the whole issue with China now leaning towards supporting Russia openly and never pushing back against the Ukraine narrative between Russia and Ukraine. It looks like the West is getting a little fed up with that. So anticipate more pressure because of them changing the narrative, saying that the virus started in Wuhan. So things are definitely shifting with the narrative. So do you think because of this now, that's going to really intensify or ramp up this upcoming August announcement if they come to that point of announcing a new currency the way they mentioned before? To where before the end of the year. So, like by last summer, Putin mentioned it at this upcoming August
okay.
summit, they're going to be looking to announce their own inter-block currency.
Yeah,
Did that be on the front?
Yeah, I mean that's possible. And the other thing, we've recently had the G20 in India. We had the finance ministers and central bankers, and then recently we had the foreign ministers, Secretary of State. And they couldn't decide on a communique because the Americans and the West wanted to push the other G20 countries to condemn Russia and the Ukraine war, and they didn't want to know. They wanted to talk about other things. They said this is a distraction. It's bad, but so there's no really support for. We're told by the mainstream media, not just in the US, I think, but also in the UK, that the whole world is behind, the Ukraine. Right. Not that I think what's happening there is nice, but it's not true.
Right, and that's once again when you have Janet Yellen doing surprise visits, Biden doing surprise visits, in a war zone. Is like how bad are things really in that region if they're actually in that region? You know what I'm saying? Like that whole thing could be a green screen setup where they actually in Hollywood here. So I mean, once again, I haven't gone to Ukraine. I wouldn't mind going upset because I don't really feel like it's the typical war zone that I've seen from movies and stuff from prior wars. So, but I don't know. But maybe get a live stream over in Ukraine one of these this spring. What else? Any other questions out there?
Let's see.
I think the gold and silver persist says
Oh,
RTG.
here we go. Sudi has a question. I think that gold and silver, when sold, will be forced into CBDCs only unless traded directly between parties. Will this trigger a taxable event? It depends on the country, and it depends on the coins that you're holding. Here in the UK, there's no tax or capital gains tax on coins of the realm, but anything could change. The other thing that some people think might happen here in the UK, because our finances are in such dire straits, our economy is not doing well, a lot of foreigners are taking money out of the countries, that they reinstate capital controls, which is something that hasn't happened in a long time.
Oh, here's another good one right here, which will be something we'll have to wait and find out. But will CBDCs be able to purchase precious metals? My thought is at first, yes. But if it's a growing trend and on their side, from when they can see more of the citizens going towards metals, going to shopping online for bullion dealers and going actually in stores, then they're going to start putting restrictions, or they're going to decline on the dealer side. The
Or
opportunity
they'll make it very difficult for you to do it like they already do now. When you buy online, you try to buy online, they're going to say, oh, you sure this is legitimate? And they'll block your transaction, and then you have to go through a security call to make sure that it was you. So yeah, they can do anything with CBDCs, and they're doing already with what we have now.
Yeah. And another good example of the banking establishment looking to slow down or prohibit that type of escape out of dying currencies is just look at what's happening to the crypto space. Like when the whole crypto boom happened a couple years ago, all credit cards stopped. Then they got in the sector. Then they started allowing people to do it because they were making money in between. And now it looks like I think one of the companies in Europe now is not allowing transactions on credit cards back into crypto. So it's a full circle situation. Persistent says, do you think FTX would have ever been caught if it wasn't a distributed ledger? If it wasn't in a distributed ledger?
If it wasn't, FTX was an exchange, isn't it? It's not.
Is an exchange, and they came out their own little
personalized.
personalized.
I guess the bitcoins or whatever they held, people could see that going through.
I don't think that was the issue. I think SBF, Sam Bankman fraud, like literally there were external forces that exposed the criminality of that whole circuit. Because if it wasn't for Binance bringing into question whether FTT was backed fully, the government and everybody involved with that company, those companies would have just kept making money because all the politicians got paid. So it's like, yeah, it was so Binance spoiled that party, I believe. So that was an accident. Intentional by Binance, but accidental as far as.
Did you know the law firm, one of the big law firms representing FTX, is Cromwell and Sullivan? Have you heard of them? They're the biggest. They're the Alan Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles. Alan Dulles was head of the CIA for like 8 years. John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State. Basically, they work for Cromwell and Sullivan. Eric Holder worked for Cromwell and Sullivan. It's the biggest Wall Street law firm, and is heavily involved with the CIA, and they're representing FTX. It makes you wonder.
Right, exactly. So FTX was a part of the boys club, and it just happened to, it spoiled their party by all that information coming out. I don't think they wanted that to happen. But then again, it puts them in great position to now talk about regulating crypto, however that plays out. So believe me, they're not going to allow crypto to remain something that's readily available for everybody so that people can get out of the system at the same time they're trying to bring the damn thing down. So, but we'll see. What else we got here? We at 45. I guess let's get ready to dial back, Mario. Any last thoughts you want to leave us with before we hit this weekend and course, next weekend. What's coming up? We have
next week we got non-farm payrolls. Usually it's the first Friday of the month, but as it's the 3rd of February, I think they've left it to the 10th. So that will be important. And I'm not sure when the next Fed meeting is, but
next hike is
the other thing that I would say, though, you just said that they're going to regulate crypto a lot so people can't get out of the system. But there are other ways of getting out of the system. Of course, gold and silver stacking, but not just that, but maybe like here in the UK, building an extension to your house instead of selling your house and buying another house with the real estate. Maybe like Clive said, build a greenhouse and grow vegetables if you have room. So there's a lot of ways of getting out of the system, and it's not just monetary.
Very true. And speaking of which, I want to share something with you that I put this. I put this out here on my Telegram, but here is. Let me see if I can find it. Gotta shrink it down. Give me 1 second here. Here's a advertisement from Home Depot. It says Home Depot now sells tiny homes for $15,000. I'll put out there, would you buy one? So it's literally like it's like a shed, double-story shed that you can put together for $15,000. It's like, something as like a bug out place or just a income producing property, or so I don't know, just taking advantage of affordable housing.
It looks like one of those houses in Toronto that go for millions.
Correct, and that's a shed bought at Home Depot. So anyway, I thought that was funny, but
sorry, I meant Vancouver, not Toronto.
Yeah, but prices in general, the whole area is through the roof. Toronto got some. I've seen they have those shipping container homes. It's like a 3-story shipping container home and jam packed in the city. It's going for $1 million. So it's 8 feet wide. What people paying for it. So, all right, my good people. Be blessed, be safe, have a great weekend. Hope you guys enjoyed hanging out with us. What do we got?
Go ahead. Carlos wants me to show the combi bar that I found the other day. Silver.
Go ahead, put it on there. What you got?
It's 100 grams of silver.
Oops.
Oh, there you go.
Gotcha.
Anyway, you've got that house up.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right, people. Be blessed, be safe. Hope you guys enjoyed this live stream. If you have, hit the thumbs up button. Medical 64, rethinking a dollar. Take this information, share so other people can learn, watch and learn, and get an alternative opinion as to what's really going on.